The opening of this fight does not feel like a clean beginning. It feels like a warning. Ippo's narration introduces a strange sense of recognition when he looks at the opponent's highs, but the memory is blurred and unresolved. That detail creates a psychological shadow before the real exchange even settles in. It tells us this bout is carrying something more than a normal boxing contest. Then the action resumes, and the challenger immediately charges in. There is no easing into the round, no polite feeling out process. He comes forward fast and lands a hard left hand that catches the champion by surprise. The impact is so solid that the champion's knees buckle for a moment, which instantly tells us what kind of night this is going to be. The opponent is aggressive, direct, and willing to make the first statement without hesitation. The champion tries to recover his footing and create distance, but the challenger keeps pursuing him, not allowing space for a reset. That relentless pressure matters because it defines the whole bout's emotional logic. This is not a match where one boxer can relax and wait for a perfect opening. It is a match where the pressure is already there, and every second of hesitation can be punished. The familiarized mystery and the immediate aggression work together to build a tense opening, where the ring already feels crowded, even before the crowd starts to react. The match becomes more dangerous once the characters realize what kind of opponent they are dealing with. Nanako's shock at learning that the man has never suffered a knockout loss changes the whole way the fight has to be evaluated. That is a huge detail. In boxing, being hard to drop is not just a stat. It is a weapon that reshapes strategy. If a fighter can stay upright through heavy punishment, then every exchange stops being about the clean finish and starts being about whether you can wear him down faster than he wears you down. That makes the fight much uglier and much more exhausting. The opponent's toughness turns every clean-looking shot into a temporary event instead of a solution. He can absorb punishment, continue moving, and force the other boxer to keep paying the physical and mental price of trying to break him. The series keeps pointing to that kind of veteran endurance as one of the hardest things to overcome. It is not flashy. It does not get the same cheers as a knockout artist, but it is a nightmare for anyone who needs rhythm and timing to function. Once you know your opponent is not likely to be put away quickly, the whole fight gets heavier. Every round becomes a negotiation with fatigue. Every missed opening becomes more painful. Every body shot matters more because it may be the only way to slow the engine down. That is the hidden threat underneath this bout. It is not just about who punches harder. It is about who can survive long enough to make the other man doubt his own plan. By the time the fight reaches its most frustrating stretch, the arena has already made up its mind about Aoki. Round 9 becomes the point where the crowd's patience finally snaps. They are not just watching him now, they are judging him. Every defensive movement looks like avoidance. Every hold looks like delay. Every pause gets interpreted as a lack of will. The jeering grows louder and louder because the audience feels like Aoki is refusing to engage the fight on their terms. That is the kind of atmosphere that can crush a boxer from the outside in. Then, the referee steps in and deducts a point for holding and non-combative behavior. And suddenly the frustration becomes official. The entire arena gets a clear signal that Aoki has crossed a line. That is devastating, because a point deduction is not only about the score, it is about image. It tells everyone in the building that Aoki is no longer just being outworked, he is being disciplined. For a boxer already under pressure, that kind of public correction can be paralyzing. The crowd reacts even harder, Imae keeps the pressure on, and Aoki is left in the worst possible mental space, booed by the crowd, watched by the referee, and boxed in by his opponent. This is where the bout starts to feel like a collapse in progress. The fight turns the second Aoki can no longer tolerate being pushed around. That's the exact kind of emotional break Hajime no Ippo does so well. He has spent too long absorbing pressure, too long hearing the crowd's frustration, too long trying to survive without losing more ground. Then something in him gives way. Not in a weak sense, but in the sense that a dam finally breaks. The shell he had built to protect himself stops working, and what comes out instead is anger. That anger matters because it does what caution could not. It gives him the nerve to throw back with intent. Suddenly, he is no longer waiting to be invited into the exchange. He is taking the exchange away from Imae. The visual difference is immediate. Aoki's posture changes, his steps get sharper. His eyes stop looking like they are only on defense. He starts to attack. And because the shift is so abrupt, the crowd reacts with disbelief. The same people who were booing him now have to watch him as a threat. That's the power of a boxer's emotional turning point. It can happen so fast that everyone around him has to reevaluate the whole match in real time. And then comes the strike that everybody remembers, the coconut punch. The name almost makes you smile before the impact lands, because it sounds playful, even silly, compared to the tension around it. But that contrast is exactly what makes the moment so effective. Aoki has been pushed and punished long enough that the punch no longer feels like a gimmick. It feels like a declaration. The entire build-up is about a man who was being treated like he had no answer, and then suddenly he answers with something violent enough to stop the room. That is why this hit stands out. It does more than score. It reverses the emotional hierarchy. The crowd, which had been ready to write Aoki off, is forced into shock. Imae has to process the fact that Aoki still has real offense left, and everybody watching has to admit that the fighter they were mocking is still capable of changing the flow of the match. In boxing, that kind of moment can be worth more than a clean round. It tells the other man that the fight is no longer one-dimensional. It tells the audience that humiliation is not always the last word. And it tells Aoki himself that his anger can become something useful if it is released at the right time. The reason Aoki's surge matters so much is that it changes the fight's emotional geometry. Before the breakout, Imae is the one dictating movement. He is the man making decisions. He is the one forcing Aoki to respond. But once Aoki snaps and lands back, even for a brief stretch, the entire mood of the ring changes. Now Imae has to think about Aoki's power. Now he has to account for the possibility that the hesitant boxer has become a live threat. That is a huge tactical shift, because pressure fighters often rely on the other man staying uncertain. If Aoki's shot creates hesitation, then Imae loses one of his biggest weapons, confidence in the pace. This is where momentum becomes more than a word people use after the fact. It becomes a real force inside the exchange. The crowd can feel it too. The boos and frustration no longer feel like the final atmosphere. They turn into surprise, then uncertainty. The fight becomes less stable. And once stability is gone, anything can happen. That is the hidden consequence of a moment like the coconut punch. It doesn't need to end the bout by itself. It just needs to force the other guy to fight a different version of you than the one he expected. Aoki accomplishes that. He stops being the passive target and becomes a fighter Imae has to respect again. Aoki versus Imae is such a good fit for Hajime no Ippo because it captures one of the series' most important truths. Boxing is never only about technique. It is about pride under pressure. It is about what happens when a fighter is watched, doubted, laughed at, or forced into a version of himself he hates. That theme runs all through the broader memory of the series. Fighters survive by endurance. They survive by blocking. They survive by finding one opening that changes the mood of the fight. Aoki's bout takes that principle and distills it into a simple emotional arc. He gets overwhelmed. He gets booed. He gets penalized. Then he finds a way to answer back. That answer is what matters. Because in this kind of story, dignity is not restored by being treated fairly. It is restored by taking back the ring. That is why even a weirdly named punch like the coconut punch feels meaningful. It is attached to real embarrassment and real frustration, not just style. The fight says that a boxer can be clumsy, awkward, passive, or ugly in the eyes of the crowd, and still be absolutely dangerous when the emotional switch flips. That idea is central to the series. It is why fans remember these matches, not because they are flawless from bell to bell, but because they reveal the moment a fighter stops accepting the role everyone assigned him. When you connect this to the broader style of the series, the pattern is obvious. Whether it is a fighter enduring punishment, a boxer adjusting mid-fight, or a rival refusing to stay down, the story always rewards the moment someone decides to keep fighting on his own terms. Aoki's fight with Imae is another version of that same heartbeat. It is a reminder that in Hajime no Ippo, the ring is often less about proving you are perfect and more about proving you are still here. When you step back from everything that happened, the real victory in Aoki versus Imae is not just a punch count or a scoreline. It is the fact that Aoki refused to disappear. For too long, he was exactly where the fight and the crowd wanted him. Passive, frustrated, and looking like he might fold under pressure. The booing made the humiliation worse. The point deduction made it official. But the sudden burst of offense changed the meaning of the fight. It proved that Aoki still had the ability to disrupt the script. He still had the nerve to force the other man to react. He still had enough pride left to answer back. That is the thing a boxer carries out of a match like this. Not just bruises or numbers, but proof. Proof that even when you look trapped, you can still make the ring respect you. Proof that embarrassment does not always get the last word. Proof that one moment of conviction can turn a collapsing fight into a live one again. And that is why this bout works so well in a fight breakdown. It is not about perfection. It is about survival with pride intact. It is about the exact second a boxer stops accepting the crowd's version of him and throws something back into the ring. Aoki may have spent too long in the wrong position, but he ends up reminding everyone of the most important lesson in boxing stories like this. As long as you can still choose to strike, you are not done.